Welcome back to Catholic Reboot. This episode is going to be on the oath against modernism that Pope St Pius X had issued for all new priests. But before I get started, Mel Gibson had his father critiquing everything he did when he was making The Passion of Christ, and his father is probably the same age as my dad. And my dad had called me yesterday and said, "What calendar are you using?" Because I had put out the feast day of St. Hilary as the 14th. And what I forgot to do, and I'm showing this on the screen, I forgot to change the month. So I apologize. So up here, you'll see you just simply pick the month and away we go. So I don't know if you want to use this or if you have a hard copy, but I'm putting this up there so you see the URL address. But as I was saying before, you just simply click it every morning to find out where you're at. So on the 14th, I should have actually done a podcast on St. Justin. And what I'm trying to do is do podcasts on every feast day. So I owe the production of St. Hermegild and St. Justin, and I'll try to do those later. But again, this is up here. You'll see I'm highlighting. This is the actual URL address, and it's a good habit. Just click on it when you start up your laptop or your iPad or your phone every morning to see whose feast day it is. So it's actually a good habit. It also tells you the days, what's going on in your theological calendars and your liturgical calendars as well. So thank you very much. So let's continue with the oath against modernism. Now, I've spoken about this several times before, and what I was talking about in previous episodes was Pope Pius IX had actually issued a document called the Syllabus of Errors, and it listed all those errors in the culture that were trying to penetrate the church. And I'll do my best to put them at the end of this episode as well. Now, to know Pope Pius IX, he was the Pope during the Vatican Council I in the 1860s. After him was Pope Leo, and you may remember me discussing Americanism and the concern Pope Leo had about this idea of democracy and Americanism infecting the church as well. When Pope Pius X came, which was after Pope Leo, on September 1st, 1910, he had issued the oath against modernism and asked that all the clergy, especially new formed priests, recite this oath. Now, in my episode where I was critiquing the discussion over the removal of the traditional Mass in St. Peter's Basilica by Pope Francis, I had also made reference to this because a lot of the current, or I'd say modern, theologians are almost in complete defiance of those words that Pope St. Pius X had issued in the motu proprio instituting the oath against modernism. Now, you may say, well, what does this have to do with me in 2021? It's always the same thing, right? So nothing's new under the sun, and what we discover is all forms of a heresy or all forms of attacks on the Catholic Church are really nothing new. They just kind of bring up the old, dust it off, and away they go to take their attack against the Church. What Pope St. Pius X knew very well at the turn of the century was the liberalism and modernism, not only of the culture, but also starting in the church itself, was starting to rear its head, so he wanted to nip it in the bud, so to speak. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play this video because the author of this video did a good job at streaming the complete oath. I will try to pause it so that I can read through it. And if you want a hard copy of the oath, more than happy to email it to you. It is awesome if you can recite this oath with your family and kind of get in good stead of what you're actually trying to ward off in our culture, and especially now in our church. Our church is suffering from a severe form of modernism, especially our Holy Father, who we're going to pray very hard for because he is sitting in the seat of Peter. All right, so let me start this, and not bad background music, so as I pause, it's going to stop, of course. Okay, so he starts with, I firmly embrace and accept each and every definition that has been set forth and declared by the unerring teaching authority of the Church, especially those principal truths which are directly opposed to the errors of this day. And at first of all, I profess that God, the origin and end of all things, can be known with certainty by the natural light of reason from the created world, and he denotes Romans 1:90, that is, from the visible works of creation, as a cause from its effects, and that therefore his existence can also be demonstrated. I want to stop right here because if you read modern Catholic catechism, one of the questions is, do we have to believe in Genesis and creation? The answer is no, we do not. The next question was, can we as Catholics believe in evolution? The answer is yes, we can. Pope St. Pius X hits that first and foremost in this one part of the oath. Secondly, I accept and acknowledge the external proofs of revelation, that is, divine acts and especially miracles and prophecies, as the surest signs of the divine origin of the Christian religion, and I hold that these same proofs are well adapted to the understanding of all eras and all men, even of this time. Now, what is he saying? All eras and all men. In other words, Christ's truth, the truth of the Holy Spirit, never fades due to current culture. It's not like we're going from bell bottoms to straight leg jeans. It doesn't matter what era we're in or what men are around. Okay? The understanding is still the same. Thirdly, I believe with equally firm faith that the Church, the guardian and teacher of the revealed Word, was personally instituted by the real and historical Christ when he lived among us, and that the Church was built upon Peter, the prince of the apostolic hierarchy, and his successors for the duration of time. If you remember that video I had where they had the doctor of theology discussing the hierarchy of the Church and how the new theology of the Catholic Church is we don't need hierarchy. Again, here is where Pope St. Pius X is knocking that down. Fourthly, I sincerely hold that the doctrine of faith was handed down to us from the apostles through the Orthodox Fathers in exactly the same meaning and always in the same purport. Therefore, I entirely reject the heretical misrepresentation that dogmas evolve and change from one meaning to another different than the one which the Church held previously. Now, this is a huge statement. This is what I was talking about before when I said Vatican II was probably the first council, and the popes of Vatican II and the popes that came after Vatican II started to change the meaning of what the church believed, in complete defiance of previous councils of the church that became dogmatic and previous statements by the Pope. Once again, St. Pope Pius X is knocking that down as well. I also condemn every error according to which, in place of the divine deposit which has been given to the spouse of Christ to be carefully guarded by her, there is put a philosophical figment or product of a human conscience that has gradually been developed by human effort and will continue to develop indefinitely. Now, this whole idea of human conscience, okay, when he says a philosophical figment or product of human conscience, you see this rearing its ugly head in our church today. This form of humanism where they say the celebration of the Mass is a community in that it's for the people, right? And that all changes within the church have to address the current human conscience and condition. Once again, Pope St. Pius X is knocking that down as well. Fifthly, I hold with certainty and sincerely confess that faith is not a blind sediment of religion welling up from the depths of the subconscious under the impulse of the heart and the motion of will trained to morality, but faith is a genuine assent of the intellect to truth received by hearing from an external source. Okay? Now, once again, I've talked about this personal relationship with God, this blind sediment of religion welling up from the depths of the subconscious, right? The deposits of the faith, as prescribed by the Catholic Church, are very specific, right? And very certain. Why is that? Because if everyone decided to follow a faith according to their own precepts, you basically have a faith of 1 million or 1 billion different views, and eventually it dies with each and everybody. By this assent, because of the authority of the supremely truthful God, we believe to be true that which has been revealed and attested to by a personal God, our Creator and Lord. Furthermore, with due reverence, I submit and adhere with my whole heart to the condemnations, declarations, and all the precepts contained in the encyclical Pascendi and in the decree Lamentabili, especially those concerning what is known as the history of dogmas. Okay, what he's referring to here is the dogmas of the faith over the 2,000 years of the Catholic Church have always been a further development that have solidified the faith of the Catholic Church. Okay, once dogmatic, future generations can't come up and willy-nilly decide they're going to change dogma. Now, what we hear with the Vatican II crowd is, you're going to tell us that the previous popes can decree something for all times and future popes have no way of changing those. That's exactly right. Why do we believe that? Because the teaching of the faith cannot be in error, right? How do we know that? Because what the church has consistently done throughout its history, if there is an error, there is a council called and the error is corrected. But the errors that Vatican II tries to pull out of the history of the church were not errors at all. It was just a new form of modernism trying to strip our traditional Catholic dogmas from us. Why? Because they needed to wound the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. So they use this real modern and liberal approach to saying, oh, those old men in those old days. Like I said before, then what would they think of Christ 2,000 years ago? That old man that was on a cross and is no more relevant? I also reject the error of those who say that the faith held by the Church can contradict history, and that Catholic dogmas, in the sense in which they are now understood, are irreconcilable with a more realistic view of the origins of the Christian religion. Now, this statement is almost prophetic. It's as if Pope St. Pius X was looking down the road by 60 years and knew that the Church was going to start to contradict its history and contradict its dogmas. I apologize. I'm going to pull that back a little bit. I also condemn and reject the opinion of those who say that a well-educated Christian assumes a dual personality, that of a believer and at the same time of a historian, as if it were permissible for a historian to hold things that contradict the faith of the believer, or to establish premises which, provided there be no direct denial of dogmas, would lead to the conclusion that the dogmas are either false or doubtful. Now, this is very important because in the episode that we had listened to regarding the doctor of theology, what was it, Massimo? He had said this exact thing, right? So he was saying that when we look at the historical view of the Church, he created his own history, right? And started to hold a history that contradicted the faith of the believers by saying the old theology cannot replace the new theology. The question is, what is the new theology? If it's not part of our dogma or the doctrines of the faith, we simply do not follow it or follow teachers that are spreading a form of heresy as he was doing in that interview. Likewise, I reject that method of judging and interpreting sacred scripture, which, departing from the tradition of the Church, the analogy of faith, and the norms of the Apostolic See, embraces the misrepresentations of the rationalists and with no prudence or restraint adopts textual criticism as the one and supreme norm. We hear this a lot out of the modern theologians. We're even starting to hear it out of Pope Francis. So even the man sitting in the chair of Peter is misrepresenting and is adopts this textual criticism of the past, which is what? It's a form of modernism. It really is a poison. Furthermore, I reject the opinion of those who hold that a professor lecturing or writing on a historical theological subject should first put aside any preconceived opinion about the supernatural origin of the Catholic tradition or about the divine promise of help to preserve all revealed truth forever, and that they should then interpret the writings of each of the fathers solely by scientific principles, excluding all sacred authority, and with the same liberty of judgment that is common in the investigation of the ordinary historical documents. Finally, I declare that I am completely opposed to the error of the modernists who hold that there is nothing divine in sacred tradition, or what is far worse, say that there is but a pantheistic sense, with the result that there would remain nothing but this. Plain simple fact one to be put on a par with the ordinary facts of history, the fact, namely, that a group of men by their own labor, skill, and talent have continued through subsequent ages a school begun by Christ and his apostles. Now this is really important because what we've seen since Vatican II is this redevelopment of the Catholic Church. It continues to this time. There's this understanding that they know better than Christ. They know better how the church should have proceeded and how Christ explained to the apostles what he wanted to have done. Now, where do we see something like this? We'll see someone like Pope Francis apologizing to Martin Luther. If you've not seen that, he apologizes for what the church did against Martin Luther. Martin Luther, basically, in subsequent ages, schooled the faithful in a different vision of Christ and his church. I firmly hold then, and shall hold to my dying breath, the belief of the fathers in the charism of truth, which certainly is, was, and always will be in the succession of the episcopacy from the apostles. In other words, the apostolic and the approach to the epistle mission that the apostles brought forth. Okay. The idea here is the Pope is basically making an oath at the very end. The purpose of this is then not that dogma may be tailored according to what seems better or more suited to the culture of each age, rather that the absolute and immutable truth preached by the apostles from the beginning may never be believed to be different, may never be understood in any other way. I promise that I shall keep all these articles faithfully, entirely, and sincerely, and guard them and violate no way, deviating from them in teachings or in any way in word or in writing. Thus I promise, this I swear, so help me God. Here is the oath. Now, what we hear today is very little about this. Most Catholics never knew that St. Pope Pius X wrote the oath against modernism, and surely not those popes that existed at the time of the council, which is Pope John the 23rd, Pope Paul VI. We did not hear it from Pope John Paul II. We did not even hear it from Pope Benedict, and we surely are not going to hear it from Pope Francis. The big question is, why would they stop using this oath? And I had made a mistake in my previous episode. I said 1969. They actually stopped using it in 1967. So the question you have to ask is what it actually said at the end of that presentation. Why in 1967 did they remove the oath against modernism? What was it in its construct that so offended the Catholic Church? What was it in its construct that so offended the fathers of the Second Vatican Council? And it's clear. It's similar to what we see in our culture today. It's this cancel culture mentality. If it looks like it's going to offend a group of people, we're simply going to remove it. What Pope St. Pius X knew, as his predecessors knew, was it was coming full steam ahead to start removing these dogmas and deposits of faith and doctrine from the Catholic Church. And what we're seeing, especially now, post-Vatican II, is there are significant number of theologians and college doctors of theology that are rewriting our Catholic dogma and rewriting what our doctrine of the faith is. So as a family, you should print out this oath, and if you want, I'll get you a copy of it, and you should recite it together. You should also go to your parish priest and ask them, have you ever taken this oath as a religious? And if not, why would you not have done that? And listen very close to the answer. Okay? We really are at a time in history, especially church history, we have to be on guard and we have to pay close attention to what is going on within our church. Why? Because we are being the ones that are to safeguard it, right? I've always said, I think if the Catholic Church suffers, it's going to be the laity that are going to come back and remind the religious leaders, you have to get back to the traditional faith of the Catholic Church. Otherwise, it's going to just continue to disintegrate. The young kids today have absolutely no idea any of this existed. They never taught it. They weren't explained it. So we as older Catholics either have to relearn it, learn it again, and go back to our children and grandchildren, teach them these things. Okay, enough said, and I'll stop discussing it. But it really is a great thing that St. Pope Pius X did for us.